Legends aren't born from perfection. They're born from chaos. From late nights in greasy garages, from questionable mods that somehow work, and from machines that shouldn't have mattered but became unforgettable. This is a story bigger than just one car. This is a story of the Golden Age, the era when Detroit thundered with horsepower, when Japan taught the world how to tune, and when Europe whispered, balance is everything. From the Mustang that kicked off a revolution, to the Supra that became an icon of speed, to the M3 that made every corner feel like a racetrack. This isn't just history. This is car culture at its peak. Cue James Balducci voice. Today on Up to Speed, we're paying tribute to the cars that defined an era. Cars that weren't just fast, weren't just cool, they were the heartbeat of a generation. Welcome to the Golden Age, the muscle boom when America found horsepower. All right, let's set the scene. It's the 1960s. The suburbs are booming, gas is dirt cheap, rock and roll is blasting from every radio, and Ford looks at America and says, hey, what if freedom had a V8? Enter the 1964.5 Mustang. Now, this wasn't the first car to have power, but it was the first car to package it in a way that was affordable, stylish, and honestly, sexy as hell. It wasn't just a car, it was a cultural explosion. Over 400,000 Mustangs were sold in the first year alone. That's like if every TikTok user suddenly went out and bought the same car. The Mustang wasn't just transportation, it was an identity, and here's the thing. When Ford lit that match, every other American automaker panicked. Chevy was like, oh, crap, we need one of those. Boom, the Camaro was born in 1966. Dodge rolled up and said, nah, bigger is better. Boom, the Charger. Plymouth went wild with the Cuda. Suddenly, horsepower wasn't just a number. It was a weapon. Muscle cars turned every main street into a drag strip. They were loud, they were brash, and they guzzled fuel like frat boys guzzle beer. But nobody cared, because when you mashed that throttle, when that carburetor screamed and the rear tires begged for mercy, you felt like the king of the world. Take the Dodge Charger, immortalized by Bullitt and the Dukes of Hazzard. That long hood, that fastback roofline, it looked like it was breaking speed limits even when parked. Or the Chevy Camaro Z/28, which took the Mustang's crown in Trans Am racing and made bow-tie fans everywhere puff their chests out. These weren't just cars, they were rolling middle fingers to conformity. They said, why? Blend in when you can do a burnout leaving the grocery store? Of course there were problems. Muscle cars weren't exactly eco-friendly. By the early 70s, rising insurance costs, oil crises, and government regulations started choking the party. Big block V8s got neutered, and suddenly the fire-breathing monsters of the 60s were shadows of themselves. But here's the twist. Legends don't die that easy. Even as the golden era of muscle faded, the idea of it lived on. Kids who grew up watching Mustangs and Camaros tear down boulevards kept that spirit alive, and decades later, when retro-styled Camaros, Challengers, and Mustangs came back with modern tech, it was proof that muscle never really left. The muscle boom mattered because it wasn't just about speed, it was about accessibility. For the first time, the average American kid could buy a car that felt like a race car. It gave us freedom, rebellion, and a soundtrack of screaming V8s that still echoes today. So yeah, muscle cars weren't perfect. They were crude, they handled like boats. They broke down, but they mattered. They defined an era where the only rule was more power, more noise, more fun, and while America was busy flexing with brute strength, on the other side of the world, a different kind of legend was rising. One that didn't roar, it spooled. One that didn't burn rubber, it drifted. Japan was about to crash the party. The JDM invasion, when Japan took over the streets. Alright, so muscle cars were busy making America loud and proud. But across the Pacific, Japan was cooking up something different. something smarter, something faster, something that didn't just shout at you, it whispered, "Trust me, I got this." Godzilla rises the Nissan Skyline GTR. First up, the Nissan Skyline GTR, nicknamed Godzilla. Why? Because when it hit the scene, it devoured everything in its path. We're talking AWD, twin-turbo, computer-controlled wizardry that basically made the driver feel like a superhero. In Japan, the R32 GTR was so dominant in racing that officials literally had to change the rules. That's like if LeBron was so good they just banned dunking. And thanks to video games like Gran Turismo, kids all over the world who had never even seen a Skyline in real life suddenly knew every spec, every engine sound, every corner of every track this thing dominated. For a generation, the Skyline wasn't just a car, it was a mythical beast. The Supra, 2JZ, no problem. But if the Skyline was Godzilla, then the Toyota Supra was its rival dragon. And oh boy, the Supra. Let's talk about that engine, the 2JZ GTE. Inline 6, twin turbo, iron block so tough it could probably survive the apocalypse. Stock, the Supra was fast, but tuned it. Became a hypercar killer. We're talking 1,000 horsepower on stock internals. You could sneeze on a Supra and suddenly it's making 4 figures. And then Fast and Furious happened. Paul Walker, orange Supra, quarter-mile showdown against Vin Diesel's Charger. Boom, the Supra wasn't just a car anymore, it was a movie star. It was every kid's desktop wallpaper. It was the car that launched 1,000 fanboys. The RX-7, the rotary rebel. Then we got the Mazda RX-7. The RX-7, powered by a tiny little rotary engine. Here's the deal. It wasn't reliable. It guzzled fuel. Apex seals were basically made of dreams and disappointment. But when it worked, my God, it was magic. Lightweight, perfectly balanced, and with a sound that made you feel like you were piloting a jet fighter. The RX-7 taught the world that performance didn't have to be conventional. It didn't need pistons. It just needed passion. And once again, video games and anime, Initial D, anyone, turned this car into a cult classic. The Civic Type R, grocery getter, turned samurai sword. Now let's talk about the underdog, the Honda Civic Type R. On paper, it was just Civic, a car your aunt used to buy groceries. But Honda sprinkled some magic dust, lightweight chassis, high-revving, naturally aspirated VTEC engine, razor, sharp handling. Suddenly, the Civic went from boring commuter to track assassin. The Type R proved you didn't need turbos. You didn't need a giant V8, you just needed balance, engineering, and a willingness to rev to 9,000. Every kid who couldn't afford a Skyline or Supra suddenly had a hero they could actually buy. The AE86, the Drift King, the humble Toyota AE86 Corolla. On its own, just a light rear-wheel drive Econobox. But then came Initial D. Suddenly, every kid in the world knew about tofu delivery, mountain passes, and a driver named Takumi who could beat turbo monsters with nothing but skill. And an old hatchback, the AE86, became the symbol of drifting, of grassroots car culture. It wasn't fast in a straight line, it wasn't flashy, but it represented something pure. The idea that it's not the car, it's the driver. Why JDM took over the world. Here's why the JDM invasion mattered. Accessibility. Unlike supercars, these Japanese machines were attainable. They weren't built for billionaires. They were built for enthusiasts. They were moldable, tunable, customizable. They invited you to grab a wrench, to take risks, to build your own legend. And culturally, they blew up. Video games like Gran Turismo and Need for Speed turned Supras, Skylines, and RX-7s into household names. Anime and manga spread their mythos even further, and when Hollywood dropped The Fast and the Furious, the JDM scene exploded globally. Suddenly, kids in America were dreaming about skylines they couldn't even legally import. Kids in Europe wanted RX-7s, even though their mechanics begged them not to. And everywhere, the idea spread that a car could be more than transportation. It could be an extension of you. The JDM invasion wasn't just about cars, it was about culture. It was about friendship, creativity, late-night street runs, and dreams bigger than bank accounts. So yeah, America gave us brute force. Japan gave us creativity, style, and a new way too. Think about performance. But across the ocean, another group was quietly building their own legends. Cars that didn't shout, cars that didn't drift tofu down mountains, cars that whispered, "Trust the corners." The Euro precision, engineering meets emotion. While America was flexing its biceps with big block muscle, and Japan was perfecting the art of turbocharged wizardry, Europe was sipping espresso, wearing driving gloves, and quietly crafting legends of their own. Because if America was about power and Japan was about creativity, then Europe was about precision. The Porsche 911, the icon that shouldn't have worked. Let's start with the Porsche 911, rear engine, flat six, designed in the 1960s. And somehow it's still here. By all logic, the 911 shouldn't have worked. Putting the engine behind the rear axle is basically like strapping a rocket booster to the back of a shopping cart. But Porsche engineers didn't care about logic. They made it work, and not just work. Dominate, the 911 became the symbol of European sports cars. From Le Mans to your local cars and coffee, it carried an aura of respect. And unlike muscle cars that guzzled fuel or JDM heroes that begged for mods, the 911 whispered, "I'm already perfect, just drive." The BMW M3, the people's race car. Then we got the BMW M3. Born in the 1980s, originally as a homologation special for touring car racing, the E30 M3 was basically a wolf in accountant's clothing. It wasn't the fastest in a straight line, but throw it into a corner and it came alive. Lightweight, agile, and begging to be pushed, the M3 became the ultimate all-rounder. By the time the E46 M3 dropped in the early 2000s, with its screaming inline six and perfect balance, the legend was cemented. This was the car that turned every highway on-ramp into your personal Nürburgring. The M3 didn't just define BMW, it defined an entire generation of enthusiasts who wanted race car thrills in a daily driver. The VW Golf GTI, the hot hatch blueprint. Now, not everyone could afford a Porsche or an M3. Enter the Volkswagen Golf GTI. Launched in 1976, the GTI took a humble hatchback and gave it a shot of adrenaline. Suddenly, you had a car that was practical during the week and an absolute blast on the weekend. Lightweight, nimble, fun. The GTI invented the term hot hatch and sparked a movement across Europe. Without the GTI, you wouldn't have your Focus STS, Civic Type, RS, or Renault Sport Meganese. The GTI proved you didn't need a giant engine or rear wheel drive to have fun. Sometimes all you need is front-wheel drive and a little bit of spice. The Audi Quattro, rally royalty. Let's not forget the Audi Quattro. When it hit the World Rally Championship in 1980, it rewrote the rulebook. Before the Quattro, rally cars were rear or front-wheel drive. Audi said, "What if we used all four wheels?" Everyone laughed until the Quattro started winning. A lot. Suddenly, AWD became the gold standard. From rally stages to snowy driveways, the Quattro proved that traction is king. And it didn't just influence rally, it influenced car culture worldwide. Why Europe mattered. Europe's legends mattered because they combined engineering with soul. These cars weren't the cheapest, They weren't the flashiest, but they were crafted with an obsession for detail, for balance, for the joy of driving itself. If muscle cars were about burnouts and JDM was about mods, Europe was about that perfect corner, that moment when car and driver become one. So now we've seen America bring the thunder, Japan bring the style, and Europe bring the precision. But the real magic, it happened when all three collided. The golden age defined when worlds collided. The late 1990s and early 2000s weren't just years on a calendar. They were a cultural explosion. For the first time ever, America's brute force, Japan's creativity, and Europe's precision all collided. And what we got was the golden age of cars, the perfect storm. Think about it. By the 90s, muscle cars had evolved. The Mustang Cobra, the Camaro SS, the reborn Dodge Viper. America was rediscovering speed, this time with fuel injection and tech to back it up. Meanwhile, Japan was at its absolute peak. Supra, Skyline, RX-7, Evo, STI, S2000, an endless lineup of icons, each with its own fan base, each ready to be tuned, raced, or drifted into glory. And Europe, they were flexing too. BMW was cranking out the legendary E39 M5, a four-door sedan with a V8 that could smoke supercars. Porsche dropped the 993 and 9969 11Ss, cementing their status as timeless. Audi was dominating rally and pushing Quattro AWD into the mainstream. It was like three worlds speaking different languages but somehow telling the same story. Cars are freedom. Cars are fun. Cars are culture. Pop culture ignition. But what made this era truly golden wasn't just the cars, it was how those cars entered pop culture. Hollywood dropped The Fast and the Furious in 2001, and boom, overnight, the Supra, the RX-7, the Skyline became global superstars. Street racing, neon lights, family, barbecue memes. It all started here. Meanwhile, video games were shaping a generation. Gran Turismo wasn't just a game, it was a car encyclopedia. Need for Speed Underground made customizing cars feel like high. Article Midnight Club, Forza, even Ridge Racer. All of them put JDM legends, muscle beasts, and Euro icons right into your living room. And let's not forget anime and manga. Initial D turned a humble AE86 into the most famous tofu delivery vehicle in history. Kids who had never even seen a mountain pass in real life suddenly knew what Apex meant. This was the magic. Cars weren't just cars anymore. They were in movies, games, posters, backpacks, lunchboxes. They were everywhere. The culture of accessibility. Another reason this was the golden age? Accessibility. You didn't need to be a millionaire to play the game. Sure, you couldn't buy a Ferrari F40, but you could buy a Civic, a Miata, a Mustang, and actually build something. Cars were affordable, tunable, and there were communities everywhere. Car meets at mall parking lots. Midnight runs on empty highways. Wrenches clanging in. Garages at 2 a.m. Friendships forged over busted knuckles and cheap pizza. This wasn't just a hobby, it was a lifestyle. Whether you were swapping VTEC into a Civic, bolting turbos onto a Supra, or lowering your Golf GTI until sparks flew, you were part of something bigger. And that bigger wasn't defined by dyno numbers or lap times. It was defined by joy. The world shared the same dream. The real beauty of the golden age. For the first time, the whole world was dreaming about the same cars. An American kid in Ohio wanted a Skyline he couldn't import. A Japanese kid was obsessed with Camaros from movies. A European driver wanted a Mustang because it looked badass on screen. Car culture wasn't divided anymore. It was global. We were all connected by posters, games, movies, forums, and late-night YouTube clips of cars doing dumb things. It didn't matter where you were from. You spoke the same language. Horsepower, boost, cornering, freedom. why it was golden. So why do people call this era the Golden Age? Because it was the perfect balance. Cars were fast, but still analog. No touchscreen nonsense. No lane-keeping babysitters. You felt everything. Cars were advanced enough to be amazing, but not so over-engineered that you couldn't work on them yourself. And most importantly, they were affordable enough that normal people could actually own legends. Today, a Supra sells for the price of a house. Skylines are auction gold. M3s are climbing. But back then, they were just cars. Cars you could daily drive, race on weekends, and fix with a basic toolkit. It was golden because it was real. The late 90s and early 2000s weren't just about horsepower. They were about community, accessibility, and joy. Muscle, JDM, Euro, they weren't rivals anymore. They were pieces of the same puzzle, and when you put those pieces together, you got the most legendary, unforgettable era in automotive history. But here's the thing about golden ages: they don't last forever. The legacy and closing more than machines. Golden ages don't last forever. The late 90s and early 2000s were lightning in a bottle. And like all lightning, it eventually faded. Emissions laws got stricter. Insurance rates skyrocketed. Technology shifted from analog to digital. Suddenly, traction control, airbags, and safety ratings mattered more than raw soul. The world moved on. But here's the thing: we never did. Legends don't die. Cars like the Supra, the Skyline, the RX-7, the Mustang, the M3, they became more than metal. They became legends. They became stories. Every dent, every midnight fix, every burnout in an empty parking lot, those weren't just moments. They were memories. And those memories lived on. That's why 20 years later, people are paying insane prices for these cars. Not because of horsepower, not because of lap times, but because these cars remind us of who we were: young, reckless, dreaming big, living free. The community lives on. It's bigger than ever. Car meets may have moved from mall parking lots to Instagram feeds, but the heart hasn't changed. People are still building, still racing, still dreaming. Only now they're streaming it, posting it, sharing it with the world. The language of car culture has gone global again. Except now it's not just about JDM versus muscle versus Euro. It's about all of it together. What the Golden Age taught us. At the end of the day, the Golden Age taught us one thing: cars aren't just machines. They're canvases. They're experiences. They're mistakes, breakdowns, late-night garage laughs, and stories we'll tell for the rest of our lives. The Mustang taught us that speed can be loud and brash. The Supra taught us that legends can come from the unlikeliest places. The M3 taught us that precision is beautiful. And the GTI taught us that fun doesn't have to be expensive. Together, they created something we'll never forget. The golden age of cars may be over, but the joy it created, the friendships it forged, the legends it left behind, those will never die. Because cars aren't about trophies or dyno charts or lap times. They're about joy, pure, ridiculous joy. And in that joy, the golden age lives forever. If you enjoyed this incredible story, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more epic automotive adventures. Your support keeps these stories alive.